Welcome to the Wealth Matters podcast, where investors come together to better understand how to build passive cash flow and create generational wealth without all the confusing mumbo-jumbo. Here's your host and co-author of Amazon #1 bestseller, Alpesh Parmar.
Welcome to Monday's section of Wealth Matters podcast. Hope all of you guys are doing good. Of course, we keep hearing about right now Russia and Ukraine war, the gas prices, inflation, real estate too frothy, stock and crypto markets have seen some sort of correction, not a huge correction. So lots of things are happening. So I want to talk about today about inflation and how it affects us, right? Because there's been a lot of talk about inflation lately. And while government officials and monetary policy makers keep saying price spikes are temporary and transitory, here's the truth. Nobody, including the White House and the Federal Reserve, knows how the current trend will play out from here. Human behavior is notoriously hard to pin down. What's more, the government's official inflation numbers have always been flawed. That's very interesting number to look. You have heard about Consumer Price Index, CPI. That's the government's official inflation measure. Generally speaking, the CPI measures the average change in prices that consumers pay for a specific selection of goods and services over a period of time. So if the CPI rises over a short period of time, it's a sign of price inflation, meaning your dollars buy less, while a falling CPI is an indicator of price deflation, so your dollars buy more. However, there are many different versions of the CPI. There's the CPI for urban wage earners and clerical workers. It's called CPI-W, which is the version that determines cost of living adjustments for Social Security and federal retirement benefits. There is also the CPI for all urban consumers, CPI-U, which measures price changing in urban areas of 2,500 people or more and is used when adjusting the returns on Treasury inflation protected security. It's called TIPS and I bonds. That is the CPI for all urban consumers, all items less food and energy, which is commonly called core CPI. So I'm confusing you guys, right? That the name suggests there is also CPI-U, which does not factor in price changes for food and energy. Now it just gets worse and worse. There is also the CPI for elderly, CPI-E, which is designed to track expenses for household run by people 62 and older. And there is even something called Chained CPI. I won't get into the weeds on Chained CPI, but it tends to report even lower inflation rates because it magnifies some of the inherent flaws already in the government methodology. So what do inflation really measure? Let's say you go to the grocery store looking to buy a bottle of wine or something, and then now it's up to $3 a pound from last week or $3 a liter from last week. The government's inflation measures assume you'll just switch to flanks and now you will buy less, right? So basically the CPI does not counter for all the cost of living and other issues, right? Let's say talk about housing costs. The different types of CPIs haven't used actual home prices since 1983. So there are so many ways they confuse you, and I don't think the 6 or 7% CPI it's real or the inflation is real. Last month CPI-U was running at 5.4% year over year, the largest 12-month increase since August of 2008. So when you just look at in the CPI, you don't consider the cost of living, the housing costs. So there are lots of things to keep in mind. And that's why I think we need to make sure we invest in the right assets, like, of course, cryptos, or where you can get staking rewards, or stocks which will pay you in dividends, or of course real estate, but you have to buy it at the right price. Now, last week, inflation was officially reported at 7.9%, which is the highest that US has experienced in more than 40 years, right? Core inflation, which excludes food and energy, is up 6.4% over the last 12 months. So if you look at the price increases over last year from the CPI report, used cars have gone up by 40%. Gasoline has gone up by 38%. Gas utilities over 23%. New cars, 12%. Electricity is 9%. So food at home, 8%. So overall CPI, that's how it comes down to 7.9%. And cloth, apparel, 6%. Transportation 6%, 6.6%. So high inflation is not just happening in the US though. ECB has increased their 2022 inflation forecast from 3.2% to 5.1%. That is 50% increase in their inflation expectations. The important thing to call out is that these numbers are the official calculations according to the government and central bank, right, which are incentivized to report the lowest numbers possible. Almost 45% of Americans own no investable assets. This means they live paycheck to paycheck and have their entire savings in cash. This around 148 to 150 million people are being punished because of the undisciplined monetary and fiscal policy that has been pursued over last 5 years, 6 years, 8 years, and especially last 24 months since COVID. You can't print trillions of dollars, manipulate interest rates to 0%, and conduct an enormous amount of asset purchases while simultaneously expecting no negative ramifications. The establishment, both economists and the media, have been presenting the idea that the inflation wasn't going to happen, then it was transitory. Now it is supposedly somehow good for you. Obviously, this is all wrong. It always has been. Inflation was the natural outcome of these activities. And on top of then combine the economic situation with new Russia-Ukraine conflict, and you have a recipe for disaster. So United States is currently engaged in an economic war with an invisible enemy, which is inflation, right? So one of the most important things we could do right now is to immediately educate as many people as possible in personal finance topics. The faster we teach them about money, inflation, and personal finance, the quicker they will be armed with the information necessary to make sound decisions that benefit them and their family. There is no good answer on how we get out of the current economic crisis, but don't think that you picked the right stocks or cryptos in last 5 years. That's why they doubled or tripled, or even the real estate. It is the inflation, the continuous money printing, the free handing out of the free money. All of that has combined, and most of these assets have become too frothy. And this is why I want to be very careful. I want to invest, because if you keep right now $100 in bank, end of the year it would be worth $92. So I don't want to keep everything in the bank, but I also don't want to be without dry powder in case things correct. But I do at the same time, I do want to invest in assets which will continuously give me passive income. It could be dividends, taking rewards, to income coming from real estate. What do you guys think? Please comment, let me know of this episode, as well as how are you combating with inflation. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Wealth Matters podcast. If you enjoyed it, please leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes so others can enjoy the show too. Have a great week and happy investing!